In today's video, we're diving deep into one of the most critical mysteries surrounding Satan. As we've discussed so far, many of the names and descriptions attached to Satan in the New Testament, like Azazel, Mastema, and Belial, emerge from various Hebrew words during the intertestamental period, yet we haven't addressed a crucial question. Where is the connection between these figures and the serpent in Genesis 3?
So today, seasoned apologist and pastor Grant Forrester and I are going to show that this connection exists, both explicitly and implicitly in the intertestamental period. The serpent, the chief rebel of Genesis, is none other than Satan. And by examining writings from this period, we'll see that figures like Azazel, Mastema, and Belial are tied directly to this rebellious being. Stay with us as we walk through scripture and other ancient writings to piece together this grand narrative. I'm Kevin Laymon, a pastor and Christian therapist, and this is Veiled Kingdoms. Let's pierce the veil.
All right, so to start us off, let's address the elephant in the room. What's up with the General Fury?
Yes,
Colonel Fury.
Yes.
What's he actually called? General Fury?
Yeah, I think it's General Fury.
Okay,
right?
what's up with the eye patch?
Yeah. I got scratched by a cat. No, that's what happened to Fury.
Wait, actually?
Mm-hmm.
That's so lame.
Yeah, it comes out in the Captain Marvel movie.
Yeah.
Just it's not a super big deal. I have a condition called recurring corneal abrasion. And it's not.
That
it's
sounds
quite
bad.
painful. I am hurting right now. I'm going to try to get through this episode, but this is flaring up right now. So if you see me during the episode, just kind of closing my eyes or whatever, it's not because I'm bored to death of what Grant is saying. It's I am genuinely listening and engaged. But this is now the fourth or fifth time we've tried to record this episode.
Oh yeah,
and I am just determined not to let it get put off again. So here we are.
Yeah, Kevin in all of his eye patch glory.
Yes.
I told him that he needed to just dress up as Colonel Fury.
Well, we are like 2 days after Halloween, so
Yeah,
I guess it would make sense. But yeah. Okay. What do we got for today?
So we need to make the case that the serpent is Satan. We've made the case that all of these other beings are Satan, but we've not actually connected. We've basically done all of this intricate work to connect all of these names to Satan, but then not that to the serpent in Genesis 3. And so we need to revisit who the serpent is according to the Old Testament. We need to see that at least some of these characteristics that we have in the Old Testament are true, that the serpent is a divine creature, that it is a deceiver, and that it is cast down from heaven. And once we've done that, we'll make the connections to those characteristics in the intertestamental period.
So essentially, we're just trying to figure out how we got from point A to point B, right? Like, how do we go from Satan being just a adversary in the Old Testament to now all of a sudden he is a full-on being? And obviously we have traced a lot of that transition from the intertestamental period in previous episodes, but this is kind of like, here's how it all comes together.
Yeah, we're trying to tie it together. If you're just jumping in on this episode, this will be at least for now, the last of our playlist on Satan, and you're thinking, what in the world are these guys talking about? There's a whole bunch of episodes before this where we walk through all of the different Hebrew words that become personified in the intertestamental period, and then how all of that stuff is connected to Satan and all of those things. So, but the first thing we need to look at is show that he's a divine creature.
That's the first of the three.
Yeah, first of the three. And as an apologist, surprisingly, to our audience, this probably is not surprising at all, but the serpent in the garden is a divine creature, and it's meant to be interpreted that way. There are a lot of people that I deal with, Christians and non-Christians, who want to assume that what's happening in Genesis 3 is like a zoological lesson. And it's like, oh, this is how snakes evolved from not having legs or having legs to not having legs. And it has nothing to do with zoology. It's about a divine rebel. So we have to pause.
It really is funny how and I mean, I'm guilty of it. I did it most of my life, how we take 2 or 3 chapters of scripture that are clearly not trying to go into detail about science.
Yeah.
And we make them a science book. And it's like, this would be a terrible science book. There's just not enough information here.
Yeah. And there are Christian apologists who I would say I respect.
Sure.
There are Christian apologists who've made their livelihood on treating Genesis 1, 2, and 3 that way.
Seems a little bizarre to me.
They'll remain nameless. But
so the divine creature.
Yeah, the divine creature. So the serpent, or Nahash in Hebrew, was more than a mere snake. Genesis 3:1 describes it as craftier than any beast of the field. Isaiah 14:29 connects the word Nahash to the term seraph, meaning fiery serpent, indicating a supernatural aspect of this being.
Ooh, the seraph, like from the Matrix.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you want to pretend that you don't know who I'm talking about?
No, I actually can't remember. Seraph is no, I'm thinking of the two ghosty dudes.
You have to, no. I mean, the more anyway.
What's funny is we've done this episode 4 times and I still don't remember who Seraph is.
Yeah, he's the guy who guards the oracle.
That's what it was.
To truly know a man, you must fight a man.
Ooh, because I confused him for the ghosty guys who I can't remember.
Yeah, who are also totally demons.
Yeah, right.
But
totally.
And then
the
more we look at like Agent Smith, we got to do a whole thing on the Matrix. Like I could really get into that.
Yeah, let's do it.
That would be fun.
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't know. Does anybody care about the Matrix anymore? Y'all let us know in the comments. If nobody cares, then it's fine. But
every year my students are like, "What's the Matrix?" And I'm like, "How do you not know what the Matrix is?"
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you're living in it. And I'm just kidding. So seraph, which that's really biblical. The seraph stuck close to the oracle side in the Matrix, just like the seraphim do to the throne of God in Scripture. Yes. So in Isaiah 14:29, the connection there, seraph, seraphim, the flaming ones that are around the throne room of God. There's an explicit connection between Nahash and seraph in Isaiah 14:29. The other one is
the spiritual deceiver. Is that mine?
Yeah, you can do that one.
Well, thank you, sir.
Well, I think it is yours. I don't know if you're asking or not.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I've got my notes here. I'm gonna have to kind of look down, just again because the studio lighting is piercing my brain right now. So I'm gonna look down as I go through this. But yeah. So we're dealing with the Nahash in the garden as a spiritual deceiver, and so we see in Genesis 3, 4, and 5 that the serpent deceives Eve, promising that she and Adam will surely not die, but will be like God, knowing good and evil. The Old Testament gives us no ordinary creature here. This isn't just some animal that popped up and starts making philosophical and theological claims to Adam and Eve. But this being speaks, deceives, and is judged by God as a result. Okay, so we're looking now at cast down from heaven. That's the third thing that the Nahash in the garden has to be to qualify as the Satan of the New Testament.
Yeah. Ezekiel 28, 13 through 14 is traditionally linked with the fall of a divine being in Eden, referring to the anointed cherub who covers. And so that's just a blatant example of a divine being. And it even describes it as being in the garden of God. This is Edenic imagery. This passage, though metaphorical, has been interpreted by many scholars as a reflection on the serpent's divine and rebellious nature, linking the serpent to a divine being that is cast from God's holy mountain, cast down. And the passage is explicit. Go read Ezekiel 24 all the way through and you can see what we're talking about. So the serpent is depicted not only as a deceiver, but as a divine rebel. Much more significant than a mere snake. But how does this figure come to be understood as Satan? So the shift from seeing the serpent as merely a deceiver in Eden to Satan, the chief rebel, happens during the intertestamental period, between the writings of the Old Testament and the New Testament.
So this period, I guess we would say, is critical for understanding how Jewish thinkers began to link these ideas, as we have discussed in previous episodes. And so I'm looking at like the Wisdom of Solomon 2:24, and it states that through the devil's envy, death entered the world. And so notice how envy, the same motivation that's found in Isaiah 14, 12 through 14's description of the divine rebellion, ties the devil to the serpent's role in bringing death through deception in Eden.
Yeah. If you're listening and you're thinking, well, that said devil and not Satan, cool off. So in the Septuagint's translation of Job, it does the same thing. And so when you read Job in the Old Testament, you're going to see ha-satan. When you read Job in the Greek translation, they change the translation to diabolos. If you're reading it in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it's not Satan, it's the devil, but the devil means slanderer or accuser. And so this is significant because the New Testament uses the terms Satan or Satan and diabolos interchangeably. They even transliterate Satan in Hebrew to Greek. right? Like you're reading it in Greek and you're like, oh, that's not a Greek word. That's a Hebrew word,
Right.
but they've just transliterated it because they're interchangeable by that point. And so this is showing a fusion of these words, a fusion of these roles. And so just as the serpent deceived humanity, Satan becomes synonymous with the accuser. That's sort of what we're seeing building on in Wisdom of Solomon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. So in the Sibylline Oracles, then,
Mm-hmm.
145, we see the emphasis of the serpent's role as the source of deceit in the garden. The vile serpent led them off by guile. And so here, the serpent becomes not just an animal, but a symbol of cosmic evil, I guess, clearly aligning with the later descriptions of Satan. I'll tell you what's also cosmic evil. It's the bill of my hat keeps hitting the microphone. And that's driving me nuts. I'm going to bring it down a little bit.
So what we see during this period is a growing recognition that the serpent wasn't simply a creature of cunning, but an embodiment of supernatural rebellion. So figures like Satan, Belial, Azazel, and Mastema are all sort of woven into this evolving picture.
Yeah. Ancient Jewish writings and texts such as the Testament of Judah 25:3 and the rule of the community, which is like column 412, weirdos, provide additional connections.
If you're trying to follow along with us on some of this intertestamental stuff, a lot of the citations are going to be really funny. Some of the ways they're broken up, depending on the source you're using, might break them up in different ways. And so we just referenced the rule of the community, column 412. But,
Right.
That's just how the scholars are trying
Ooh,
to
but
break
it's
it
like
up.
secretly connected to Colossians 4:12
Yeah, no.
and some kind of hidden knowledge. And we have to,
Yeah, no.
no.
If you're a Gnostic and you're listening, we're glad you're here.
So the Testament of Judah 25:3, this passage speaks of no spirit of deceit of Belial,
Mm-hmm.
and Belial being cast into fire.
Yeah.
And so the term Belial, like Satan, is synonymous with a deceptive and rebellious spiritual force. And so the association of Belial with deceit mirrors the serpent's role in deceiving Eve, right?
Yeah. The deceiving of Eve, a lot of deception is going to be one of the main focuses of a lot of the spiritual stuff in the intertestamental period. That's one of the main themes in Enoch as well. False knowledge, divine revelation that destroys people, all of those kinds of things. We see also in the rule of the community here, Belial is seen as the leader of evil spirits, ruling over the damned in eternal judgment, another strong parallel to Satan's role in the New Testament. Furthermore, Matthew 25:41 speaks of the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels, reinforcing that Satan's destiny is consistent with the fates described for Belial and other evil figures.
Okay. And now that brings us to Azazel and Mastema. So Azazel is associated with rebellious angels in 1st Enoch and the scapegoat ritual of Leviticus 16. Mastema, another name linked with Satan in the Jubilees, serves as the accuser of humanity. So both Azazel and Mastema exhibit the same rebellious traits that we find in the serpent and Satan, reinforcing the idea that all these figures represent the same ultimate rebel.
Yeah. These intertestamental connections clarify that, not really clarify, but sort of clarify, but I'll have a word on that in a minute. But these intertestamental connections clarify that Satan, Azazel, Belial, and Mastema aren't necessarily supposed to be seen as separate entities, and that's really crystallized in the New Testament. But they are different names and roles for the same cosmic antagonist that deceived humanity at the very beginning.
But to clarify, they point to the same type of role, but they are all very different beings, right? Because that came up in our comments. We're not saying Mastema or Belial are the Nahash or are Satan. We're just saying that they represent elements that help tie one to the other.
Yeah, well, it depends. It depends on where you're reading. In the intertestamental period, so at the end of this journey, through the intertestamental period and scripture and stuff, it sort of becomes clear. And so while names like Azazel and Mastema and Belial develop in different Jewish traditions, they all point back to the same figure. So it's a common idea, the serpent in Genesis, who is Satan, right? This chief rebel. But to say, and I hope that we haven't done this, but to say that the intertestamental period gives some sort of clear, concise unified, organized, universal understanding that all of these beings are actually Satan and they're all the serpent. That's not true. So you're going to find places where Satan is seemingly subservient to some of these creatures, or these creatures are subservient to Satan, or there's multiple Satans, and there's so much going on in the intertestamental period. If someone ever tells you, hey, I have figured out the intertestamental period, and this is how all of it works, and I have all the answers, run.
Yeah.
There's so much disagreement and restructuring of ideas, contradictions in the intertestamental period, even stuff that some church traditions will hold as scripture, and then the pseudepigrapha, which no one considers scripture, all of those kinds of things. There's so much just bubbling in the pot between the Old Testament and the New Testament that no one could say this is a clear picture of what's going on. However, the New Testament is crystal clear. It is crystallized. It is uniform and universal in its understandings of these concepts, which is why no Christian tradition, no matter what Christian tradition someone's from, none of those traditions disagree on what the New Testament's supposed to be. So what we're trying to do is sort of drop down into different places. So we're basically saying, here's what the Old Testament says, and then here's what the New Testament says. Where does all of this stuff in the New Testament that's not in the Old Testament, where does that stuff come from? And so we're dropping into the intertestamental period to say, these are the first places that this stuff pops up. And so the authority is not the intertestamental period. That's not what we're trying to argue. The authority is the New Testament, but these ideas begin to show up for the first time in this period, which is why we're trying to sort of dig here and work here.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess we would say that what the intertestamental period does for us is it shows how ancient Jewish writers were grappling with their understanding of the supernatural world.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were attempting to make sense of evil, rebellion, and the cosmic struggle between God and his enemies. And so by the time we reach the New Testament, these varied traditions converge, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Is that the word we would use? Into like one crystallized understanding. And so the serpent who deceived Adam and Eve is none other than Satan, the great rebel destined for defeat.
Yeah, yeah. And we even demonstrated in one of the earlier episodes on Belial that Paul even uses that word. He says you cannot partake of the table of Christ or the table of God and also partake of the table of Belial. Or what fellowship does Christ have with Belial? And like, so Paul even uses that word. So there's certainly this convergence, or certainly this crystallization of all of this stuff into this idea of the chief rebel. So we'll wrap up today's episode. So we've traced the serpent from Genesis to his identification as Satan, the chief enemy of God. This is a huge moment in our series on Satan's origins and roles, but we're not done yet. In our upcoming episodes, we're going to dive deeper into things like divine combat, the angel of the Lord, the conquest of Canaan, witchcraft.
Yeah.
We've got a lot coming down the pipeline.
Sure. So I guess we would say that's all we've got for today.
That's all we've got for
Boom.
today.
Take that, KB. And anyway, all right. Well, if you're still with us at this point, we have to assume that this has been helpful to you. So we would appreciate it if you would consider giving a like to the video or subscribe to the channel. If you're new here, we've got a lot of videos in the past, good library of content over my face right now that you can go back and listen to. We would certainly appreciate that. I think it'd be good for you as well. Grant, thank you for being here.
Oh man, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope your eye feels better the next time we're recording.
It's been a pleasure for you.
Yeah.
It's been a marathon for me, but I'm glad we got through it.
Yeah, and we're glad all of you are here listening. God bless.